Is there any such thing as free moral agency? What are you smiling at? Oh, you're laughing. We've talked about this before, but this is going to be a different twist. Let's talk about this. Let's break it down. What is an agent? We have insurance agents, FBI agents, IRS agents. Actually, we have more alphabet soup bureaucratic type agents than we have other agents anymore. We do have powers of attorney. You've heard of that, no doubt. That's another kind of agency. What is an agent? Before you say anything, understand this, that agency is not a required course in law school, except at just a handful of schools around the country. It's fundamental, but it is ignored, forgotten, and it's been trashed. What is an agency?
I would think it could be used like, you have an insurance agent and you have an insurance agency.
It's a person or business authorized to act on another's behalf.
Our law confuses power and authority. We have what we call a power of attorney. It's not a power of attorney, it's an authority of attorney. That means it's an agency. I say to Clark, I'm going to give you a piece of paper that says you have full authority to sell my house for any price you can get for it above $100,000. And I write all that down, I sign it, I give it to him. He has authority. And I've given him not only authority, I've given him proof of authority with a piece of paper. And then on there, maybe I might write any money you get for the sale of this house, you can deposit in the bank on my behalf, under my name, whatever bank you think you ought to deposit it in. And I sign that. And then when he goes to the bank, they say, well, do you have power to deposit this on his behalf in his name? And he gets out this piece of paper and shows them. That's called an agency. An agency is when you act on behalf, as your definition said, of another. Do police officers have an agency? You believe they do. Do IRS agents have an agency? That's why we call them agents. Do insurance agents have an agency? Could an insurance agent go down here and he's got an insurance agency and I come in and he says, look, I can sell insurance, but I want to do some other things for you on behalf of the insurance company. I want to loan you some money. They've given me freedom over one of these accounts, and I think I'd just like to loan you some money at 10% interest so I can make some money for the company. And if I have any brains at all, I'll say, wait a minute, does the company authorize you to do this? Do you have an agency? Is it within the scope of your agency? Oh, an insurance agent, let's say an FBI agent or an IRS agent, are they limited in what they can and can't do? What are they limited by? Well, the experience that I've had, we had the IRS agents bust in on us. And they rifled everything, they took everything, they took the pictures off the walls, they emptied the drawers. The problem was they didn't have a warrant. Did they do anything wrong? Did they act within the scope of their agency? Well, how do I know, and how do you know that they did not act within the scope of their agency?
We would have to see if there's any law that would prevent them from doing it.
Is there a law?
I believe there is.
Do you know what limits IRS agents?
Is it that thing called the Constitution?
Yeah, what part of the Constitution would limit them? Fourth Amendment. As a matter of fact, does anything in the Constitution limit any of us that aren't employed by the government? Fundamentally, and there have been some glitches about this, but the Constitution doesn't limit anyone, except those that are employed by the government, or those that work in collusion with those that are employed by the government.
Or that would be an agent.
Because that's the scope of their agency is limited, the envelope that the Constitution puts them in. The Constitution was written for one reason, to limit the government, not to limit you. And there are some arguable exceptions that have occurred since the Civil War, but those may not be so the exceptions people think they are. But the Constitution, the whole tenor of the document is to limit government. Well, coming back to the agency. They are to act within the scope of the agency that the Constitution gives them. If they act outside that scope, do they have any authority? If they act outside the limits, then let's say not only the Constitution, but Congress passes laws that are pursuant to the Constitution in order to give the Constitution a little more teeth and legs. Would those laws limit an agent of the government? Laws of Congress. Certainly. As long as they don't violate the Constitution, they're meant to limit. And that's why, for example, executive orders theoretically are written to limit bureaucrats. They're not used that way, the way they should be, but that's what they're for. Let me go back to the question again. Is there any such thing as a free moral agent? Let me put it in another term. Is there any such thing as an agent who is free to be immoral? Free to be immoral. Is that the same thing as saying free moral agent? Does that define what a free moral agent is? If I say, well, if you're a free moral agent, is it true, as we tried to establish a while ago, that all agencies have a limit as to what the person who's in the agency can do? If you have an agency, you're limited in the scope of your agency. God, the Bible says God has given authority to every believer. He says that in John chapter 1, verse 12, for example. He has given rights to men. It says that in the Declaration of Independence. And they're inalienable. That means they can't be separated from us by men. Well, if God has given us those rights and He's given us a standard, are we free as agents of God to violate His standards? You say no. What do you say, the guy with the sunglasses?
I say no, but is that the definition of free moral agent? I've never heard that before.
Well, I'm not saying there is a definition of free moral agent. Matter of fact, it's my conclusion, I'll get there real quick, that that's a contradiction in terms and it should never be used. All cultic people who are not Christian make that the centerpiece of their religious point of view. If you're within the scope of your agency, you have the right to do what your principal, maybe we'd say it was God if we're Christian people, has authorized us to do. And we do not have the right to do what He has not authorized us to do. I'm coming to Romans 13. Now, you do understand what I'm saying, and I understand your point because I used to say that, and I heard everybody that was around me talk about free moral agency. But looking back now, I'm thinking, that's a senseless phrase. The words deny themselves. Only two possibilities for mankind. Seems like this is the way the Bible works out in a lot of places. Either we believe that we work and we earn bread and we eat it, or we believe that we work, we earn bread, and other people get to eat it. Now, I'm not the first guy to say that. Abraham Lincoln said that at the debate, I believe it was here in Coles County, back in 1859. But he repeated that principle over and over again. I'm not promoting him. I'm just making the point that that was true, I believe, what he said. And then he went on to say there are only two political positions that are possible. Either that one, on the one hand, you earn bread and you eat it, or you earn bread and the other fellow gets to eat it. And then he went on to make the point that when you earn bread and the other fellow gets to eat it, that's called divine right of kings. He referred to that old doctrine that we'd referred to before, that William Tyndale, the man who this translation is based on, believed, and he said that King Henry VIII, who eventually ended up killing him, he said that King Henry VIII answers to no man on earth and only to God after this life. Do you believe that? Obviously you don't, because you're an American. But we're so far removed from that, we like to think. But that's what Romans 13 is about. It's about that doctrine that they came to be called the divine right of kings in the 16th century, But it wasn't called that when Paul wrote this, but it was very much alive from Babylon, from the earliest days in Genesis chapter 11, and Nimrod. That's what he's talking about. And as we approach this passage, we must, I believe, before we start, understand there are only two positions you can take respecting the interpretation of this passage. Does anybody remember what we said was what Paul's kind of driving at here? And he starts in chapter 12. And what is, there's one law of God, one decree that he gives us here that he's concerned about. And he quotes the Old Testament. Do you remember what it is? Vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord. Let's talk about another, this is an important like agency, concept. And it's all through the Bible. It starts at the beginning, goes clear to the end. Now we like to call it, it's a big word, I wish we had a better one, this is too big, jurisdiction. Jurisdiction. Anybody want to take a stab at what that means? What is jurisdiction?
The area of authority.
Oh, that's beautiful. Area of authority. So if you have jurisdiction in your home, do you, by the way?
Of course he does.
Yeah, no, I didn't ask. He has power. Does he have authority in his home?
Well, both of those are debatable.
All of us are given, again, come back to John chapter 1, verse 12, are given authority. In John 1:12 in the King James, it says power. That, again, that's Tyndale, and even Rick put it that way. That's not what it is. It's authority. Authority, there are three words we can use for authority, and we can substitute these here, and it might help us understand. Authority is one of them. That's a good one. The other one is jurisdiction. It means the same thing. The other one is right. Right. I have the right to free speech. I have the right to a jury trial in a criminal case. I have a right to due process. These are in the Bill of Rights. I have the right to property. I have the right to my life, and I have the right to my liberty. And God gave me all those. And our founding documents then flesh those out a little bit. But if I have authority, I have it within a jurisdiction. Think of jurisdiction as a circle. And define, it's like we were talking about a while ago about the scope of an agency. Within that circle, whatever that circle is, you have the right to, watch this, act concerning certain matters.
Are we talking about government-given rights or God-given?
Is there such a thing as a government-given right?
We have elected to represent it, said, do not burn your trash. Which it's a law that I'm in favor of. Well, then as a citizen, I don't have the right to go out and burn my trash and pollute the air.
If they can stop you from burning your trash, you never had the right to start with. If they have the right to stop you, you never had the right to burn your trash if they said no. In other words, if they can take it away from you, then they're the ones that have authority to give it. I'll go a little further with that.
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege. The government can take it from you, and they truly have the right to do that. Then it is not a right that you have. It's a privilege. Men govern, as Disraeli once said, by words. And no wonder God governs by words too. And if we're not willing to look at words closely, we're going to get misgoverned. Jurisdiction. Let's get back to this. Jurisdiction, right, and authority are all three words for the same thing. And if you have the right to do something, you have the right to do it within a certain jurisdiction, respecting certain matters. An example. I was loosely involved with a case one time, and it had to do with an Indian who claimed to be an Indian. Jurisdiction is the right to act within a certain sphere of circumstances. We come to Romans chapter 13, and it says here, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. And then it goes on to say, for there is no power but of God, the powers that be are ordained of God. And we pointed out last time, I'll say it again just in case we forget, that he's not talking about power here at all. He's talking about authority.
If you'd had an NIV, every one of those words would have been translated authority.
I noticed that. Yeah, they're translated authority. That is true. And there are very few translations that do that. William Tyndale translated it that way because he believed the king had absolute right. At least he said he did. I don't know if he was sincere, but the king he was trying to satisfy killed him over that. And that's not to demean anything that William Tyndale did, because he did much, and we're grateful for it. But he added the word power there 2 times when it wasn't even in the text, when the word authority wasn't in the text. The King James translators, in order to be on the translation team, King James demanded that they prove to him that they were absolutely committed to the divine right of kings doctrine, because King James believed that he was the law. To say that whoever's in power should be obeyed. You see why that's important to a divine right of king's person. Is that true that whoever is in power must be obeyed? I read recently of a fellow that came back from overseas. He was a Marine. Oh, no, I shouldn't say he was a Marine. He is a Marine. He came back, got out, and he put on his Facebook that he thought that 9/11 was an inside job, and not only that, he sees violence coming in this country. What happened to it? You happen to know?
Well, he got arrested.
He got arrested?
Well, they said he was crazy.
They said he was crazy. And then they arrested him and incarcerated him, and they put him in for psychological tests. He had to make a choice. Was he going to resist physically or try to sort it out in court? And that's a choice everybody has to make, and you'll make it at that moment. I suppose you have to. And sometimes it's prudent. Prudence is an important word. Jurisprudence. That means what are you going to do to prevent harm to yourself or somebody else when it's not necessary, when it's not needful that there be harm. Just because somebody has authority, though, doesn't mean that they're doing right. And that's what I'm going to get. That's what I'm coming to here. Nobody has a right to do wrong. Nobody has a right to do wrong. And it makes no difference how many badges you have on your body or how many guns you're carrying. You don't have a right, which is the same thing as saying you don't have authority to break the law, to violate the Constitution of the United States. As Americans, we would say that, or violate the principles of the Bible even. And anyone that does that will be facing the judgment of God. Let's keep reading. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. What ordinance of God is he talking about? It doesn't say resist ordinances, plural. It doesn't say resist, he's resisting the ordinance of God. No, it does say he's resisting the ordinance. Which ordinance is to which he refers is written here. Vengeance is mine. Now I want to park on this and explain some things, and I know you can't see this, but I'm going to throw this out, and you'll have to make a decision for yourself. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. The ordinance of God, I think, definite article, is clear. He's talking about that ordinance, that decree that he spoke about in verse 17, verse 19 and 20. In verse 19, vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord. That's the ordinance he's talking about. An ordinance is something that is ordered. It is something that is laid down and it's sure. It's decreed. We're not to take vengeance. And if you resist this, not this power, this authority, what authority? Well, the authority of God in giving this ordinance. Again, there are 3 principles of interpretation, not only of the Bible, but also of other documents. And those 3 principles are, number 1, context. Number 2 is context. Number 3 is context. There's a context here. Whoever resisteth the ordinance of God resisteth the authority of God. Let's play this out in context. Whoever says, I'm going to take vengeance and intends to do so, is resisting the authority of God, because he's resisting the ordinance of God, the decree of God, the principle, the first principle of God. What is he saying? He's saying you're not God. Let's talk about this word resist. This is even more fascinating to me. And I take you back to the 16th century at a remote castle on the shore of Scotland. And John Knox has just returned to Scotland from Geneva, where he was exiled. And he thought, maybe he wasn't in Geneva at that time, maybe he was just on the continent, but at any rate, the story is he thought that he was safe, and the people that believed the Bible were holed up in this castle, and they were surrounded. And he came to them, and they said to him, we want you to be our chaplain. And he was elated, and he thought he had reached the point in his life when he really could contribute to something good. And they asked him to give the first sermon that Sunday. And he preached on the verse in 1 John that says, there are many antichrists among you. And he said this. He said the word anti in the Greek New Testament doesn't mean against. And that's true, it doesn't, not really. What it means is side by side. The Antichrist is the one that will come in the end. And he said, I'm not against Christ. He'll say, I'm not against Christ. I am the agent of Christ. I have come to exercise the power of Christ on earth. He said there are many antichrists among you. The word anti is related very closely to the Greek preposition amphi. Amphi is also in the Greek New Testament. And when it says that Peter and the other fishermen were fishing all night, it says that they threw their nets first on one side of the boat, and then they threw them off on the other side. And it says, it uses the preposition there, amphi. That means one side and then the other. Both sides being the same. We have animals, we used to play with them when we were kids. We call them frogs. But we learned when we went to school they were called amphibians. And they were called amphibians because they were life forms, beyond, that lived on both sides of the water, of the water's edge. Amphibian. Well, the word here means to come alongside, to get on the opposite end of, to stand as a mirror image of, to be helpful even. Anyone that resisteth the power, the word resist is the word anti. And it means really to come alongside. Now don't get me wrong, to be anti ultimately means you are against. But in the Greek tongue, it's a little more precise, and it means you have come alongside, as it says, para. You're on the other end and you're helping. That's the idea of the preposition. Here's what I'm getting to. If you say, vengeance is mine, I will repay, you're trying to help God. And that's what he's going to say here next. They that resist, now watch this. They shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, if people want to complain about a bad translation, this has got to be it. It doesn't say that. What it says is, they will take to themselves, it's in the middle voice, they will take to themselves the power of judgment. If I say, to back up again and run it through, vengeance is mine, I will repay. What have I taken to myself? The power of judgment. And that's exactly what this says. Anyone who comes along and says, I'm going to climb into the throne with God, and I'm going to take vengeance, he has taken on himself, you could say it this way in Old English, he has taken on himself the power of damnation, but it makes it sound like he's damned himself. That's not what it's saying. It's saying he has taken on the power to damn another person. People, for example, say, judge not, lest you be judged, because the Bible says that. But yet we know that we are to judge other people. Matter of fact, you can't survive. It's common sense would tell you you have to judge other people.
So what is it saying?
Here?
No, judge not.
Judge not lest you be judged. Don't be damning other people to hell. is what it's saying. You don't have that power. This is the consistency of all these things. You don't have the power to take vengeance on other people, or the power. No, you have the power. You don't have the right to take vengeance on other people. And if you do that, you're resisting the ordinance of God. You're climbing into the throne with Him, and you're saying, I'm the judge too. And the Bible says you can't do that. They are not words that speak of just judging other people. They are words that speak of damning other people to hell. That's what he's saying here. Again, it comes back to vengeance is mine. So we haven't even got to civil government yet, is the point I'm getting at. And people make this civil government. That's not what he's talking about here. And as I'd said before, Hitler used this verse to justify himself and get people to shut up and do what they were told. And now our own federal government has colluded with pastors and preachers, and they did it down in New Orleans during the hurricane, and now they're starting to spread this rumor. This is why it's important to speak out about this. And they want pastors to help them calm the populace, while the government abuses the populace and ignores their rights. That's what's coming, unless it's stopped. Romans 13 does not give government license to do that, and they're telling pastors now that it does give them license to do that. And you need to tell people that. We need to be saying the opposite. The Apostle Paul spent more of his life in jail than he did out. He was resisting the government. Was that what, did he violate that? No. And John the Baptist spoke out against Herod and what he had done. And John the Baptist had his head cut off. He was resisting the powers that be. Did he violate? No. And we can go on and on through the Bible and in life about that. Greco-Roman, Babylonian principle lex talionis. I'm going to get you back. And the way they understood that was, you do me wrong, I'll kill you. In other words, it wasn't even tit for tat. It wasn't eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was, you're not going to do that to me, I'll kill you. And Christians were doing that one to another, and he was saying, let's just get so we don't kill each other, don't have this spirit, this attitude of vengeance, because that belongs to God alone. And we don't need to. So, and if Christians can get so they aren't killing one another, then they can take the next step and not take vengeance toward other men and women. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Again, that's afraid of the jurisdiction, afraid of the right, afraid of the law. Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise the same. Now let me stop again. Now, this is a matter of just mechanics and grammar. No place in this passage does Paul refer to, when he talks about authorities, no place does he refer to any person. In other words, authorities are not people. Authorities is a feminine word in Greek. And there's two places here where when he's talking about the authorities, one place he translates into English he, and in another place he translates they. Well, the translation he doesn't fit. It should be she, because authorities is a feminine word. So it's clear to me that he's not talking about people. He's talking about law. He's talking about, number one, the ordinance and law of God that says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord. So when he says that there are authorities, he's talking about law. He's talking about God. He's talking about his law. And he's talking about the arrangement, the order, and the words used, it means arrangement of that law that he has given us. Let's back up a minute. Just ask a simple question. You've probably heard this. Are we a government in America of laws or a government of men? Government of laws. Therefore, we say, on the other hand, that being true, it's not a government of men. Law is fundamental to us as Americans. To all Americans.
Well, the
Constitution. And the Constitution says that every state office holder, even down here at the county level, and every federal office holder has to swear an oath to defend the Constitution, because it's our authority. Men are not our authority. Law is our authority because we're a government of laws. And by the way, that does distinguish us from every country in the world, except about 4 or 5 others that have the same common law system, tradition that we have. And in our declaration, we call that the laws of nature and of nature's God. The laws of nature are the laws of God's creation. Some people call that science, arts. And the laws of nature, nature's God, Blackstone tells us, and that's the popular opinion at that time, were the special revelation of God in the Holy Scripture. Specific revelation, they call it, special revelation. So God has arranged these. There is no authority, except it come from God, and He has arranged all this authority, all this jurisdiction, all this right to act, or not act, by the way. I have a right to remain silent. That's the right not to act. He's arranged all this, and we are to follow that arrangement. And if we don't follow that arrangement, we're disobeying God. Now let's go one more step, ask another question. How biblical is our fundamental law if we're a nation of laws? It's in writing. We can examine it. Whether we follow it's another question, but how biblical is it? The Constitution be obeyed. Some shake their head, yes, but not everybody. Should it?
Yes.
Anybody disagree? It's this. You took an oath to the Constitution one time. You told me years ago. You did. Somebody else here may have. When you took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, did you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution as you understood it? Or as some legal, self-proclaimed legal scholar in a law school someplace understood it? Or the Supreme Court, how they understood it? When you took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, did you take an oath to support and defend it as you understood it, or as the Supreme Court has proclaimed it?
When I took it as I understood.
Okay, I understand that to do. Don has chosen for himself what he's going to do.
To reserve the right to veto what he thinks is wrong. So yes, for himself.
He says, even though you say that, you're still doing it as you understand.
And I think every Christian needs to do that.
He says this about conscience in this passage. Well, we're going to skip down a little bit. Wherefore ye needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. What is conscience sake? What does he mean when he says that? What is conscience?
Your basic beliefs on what is right and wrong.
Well, let's break it down real quick. I remember we talked about the word science, and I said it wasn't in common use in the English language until about 1840 or 50, and it was used by the intellectual elite to claim they had some kind of secret knowledge that other people couldn't get their hands on. So I rebel against that a little bit, and I think rightly so. But conscience is science, which is the Latin word for knowledge, and the preposition con, which means with. It just means what you do with knowledge. It's what you know. And all he's saying here, don't make it complicated, he's just saying you do this because you know what I'm talking about. Do it because you're not doing what you know to be stupid or wrong. Do it because you really believe it to be right, because your knowledge tells you it's right. That's all he's saying. And then he says, not only for wrath. That word could be translated a few other ways, and it's a dubious. I'll tell you why it's dubious. Number one, grammatically, and the vocabulary is dubious a little bit. But didn't Jesus say, fear not him who has power to destroy the body, but fear him who has power to cast body and soul into hell? Are we to fear government because they're powerful? Jesus, if we do, we're doing what Jesus said not to do. We are not to fear people with guns and clubs. And if you do, you're sinning. Doesn't mean it's easy not to do it, and somebody's got a gun pointed at you, and you can see right down the barrel and it's loaded. That's a different deal, but still, he says don't be afraid of that. This can't mean that we're supposed to fear government. It can't mean that to us as Christians.
Always.
No matter, people that are in communist countries that face the most horrendous, horrific kind of brutality from the government. The Bible says don't fear it. And if that's true, then this cannot mean, he's writing that to Christians, this cannot mean be afraid of the government. That's my point. No matter what else is said in this passage, I don't believe this passage is clear. The things I'm trying to get across are the things that I think we can know for sure. For example, where it says there, rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Is that true? Is it a true statement? I ask you again that if you, let's see, I lost it here. Rulers are not a terror to good works. That's an absolute statement. Is that true the way it's translated? That's what I'm asking. And that's my point. This is obscure. The whole thing is obscure. And therefore, in order to understand it, we interpret obscure passages with clear passages. That's why I brought the passage where Jesus said, do not fear him. In this translation, it says, rulers are not a terror to good works. Let me just say it. That is patently false the way that's translated. They are a terror to good works all over the world, and they have been since the days of Babylon. In many places in the world, if you're doing the right thing consistently, you will be jailed for a long time. Not just here, it's happening here too. But it is the evil empire that controls every country almost on the face of the planet that's doing this now. So this statement, as it's translated, cannot be true. This is obscure. And that's why I look at this translation. I know this, the way it's translated, it can't be right. It's because my senses tell me that, and the grammar tells me that. And they tried to put it in a translation, but it's almost impossible to do. Another thing, too, that part you're reading there where it goes on to talk about be not afraid, those are all obscure, too. I'm telling you, it's obscure. And the translation was translated by people who supported the divine right of kings, and that made it even more suspect. But we know it's obscure because the Bible says otherwise in clear places. And Jesus said, do not fear him who can destroy the body. We're not to do that. That's a clear statement. There's nothing ambiguous about it. I say, what do you do when you approach any problem and you don't know the answer? What's the first thing you should do? But the first thing you do is observe. The second thing you do is you say, what can I know for sure? You don't start with what you don't know or what you want to speculate about. You start and say, what can I take out of this passage that I know without doubt? And then you build on that. Once you get it, then you can start, hope God gives you more light and you can understand it. I know this about this passage. It's about vengeance. And it's about men not taking vengeance. More specifically, it's about men not murdering other men. More specifically than that, it's about Christians not murdering Christians. And Paul goes on in Corinthians and says, set up courts. Vengeance is mine. You want to get to the right answer when you've got a problem between you and your neighbor? Follow the procedures that God gives you. The procedure is very important, and you'll come to the right conclusion. Let me give you another example. Paul is big on procedure. He follows it. Jesus said in Matthew 18, he talked about if two men have a problem. You remember the story. And then he says, if you go to this fella and he won't listen to you, you're to take somebody else. And then if he won't listen to two of you, then what are you supposed to do? Do you remember? What? Take it before the congregation. And then if he won't listen to the congregation, what's to happen? He is to be disfellowshipped. That's power. But then it says, right after that, Jesus says this. Whatsoever, authority. See, that's right. Jesus said, whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And the point he's making there is that if you follow this procedure that I have given you, then the conclusion you come to, let the chips fall where they may, it is bound in heaven. Now that's usually taken out and it's said if two or three of us agree, let's just agree right now. Well, that's not it. That's inaccurate. That won't work. What it is, if you follow this procedure in this particular problem, then if you agree, at the end, God is on he's on the same page and it's bound in heaven. But the procedure is the important thing. We're trying to follow, and God's talking here about procedure too. In the midst of this, he uses words that talk about the order of procedure.